August 1945. 2 atomic bombs, 3 million dead, every major city in ruins. The Japanese economy wasn't just broken, it had been vaporized. Industrial production had collapsed to 10% of pre-war levels. Starvation was so widespread that MacArthur's occupation forces started emergency food shipments just to prevent mass death. And yet, 25 years later, Japan became the second largest economy on Earth. This wasn't a miracle, it was a blueprint. Here's what makes no sense at first glance. Countries that win wars typically dominate the peace. The victors write the rules, control the trade routes, and extract wealth from the losers. That's how it had always worked. But in Japan's case, the country that got completely destroyed somehow ended up richer than almost everyone who destroyed it. Britain, France, even the Soviet Union, all on the winning side, all eventually eclipsed by the nation they had just defeated. So what happened? How do you go from literal ashes to economic superpower in a single generation? The answer starts with a man who wasn't even Japanese. Douglas MacArthur arrived in Tokyo as Supreme Commander with a problem. The United States had just spent 4 years and billions of dollars defeating Japan. Now they had to rebuild it. But not out of kindness. The Cold War was already starting. The Soviets were expanding. China was about to fall to Mao, and America needed a strong capitalist ally in Asia, fast. Japan wasn't going to be punished, it was going to be a laboratory. MacArthur's team rewrote Japan's entire economic structure in under 7 years. They broke up the zaibatsu, the massive family-controlled conglomerates that had funded the war machine. They redistributed land from aristocrats to farmers. They wrote a constitution that banned military spending above 1% of GDP. And here's the part that changed everything. They gave Japan access to American markets, American technology, and American protection while asking for almost nothing in return. Think about what that meant. Japan could rebuild its industries without spending a fortune on defense. It could focus every yen on manufacturing, infrastructure, and exports. Meanwhile, European countries were hemorrhaging money on colonial wars and military budgets. Japan just opted out of that entire system. But access alone doesn't create wealth. Plenty of countries had access. What Japan did next was different. The strategy was brutally simple. Copy, improve, undercut. Japanese companies didn't invent the transistor radio. Americans did. But Sony made it smaller and cheaper. They didn't invent the television or the motorcycle or the camera. They just made better versions and sold them for less. This wasn't about innovation at first. It was about execution, relentless, obsessive execution. The government played a role most free market economists hate to admit. The Ministry of International Industry, MITI, picked winners. They funneled cheap loans to strategic industries like steel, shipbuilding, and electronics. They protected domestic markets with tariffs while subsidizing exports. It was industrial policy on steroids. And for about 3 decades, it worked frighteningly well. By 1968, Japan had overtaken West Germany. By 1980, Japanese cars were everywhere. Toyota, Honda, Nissan. They weren't just cheaper, they were more reliable. American automakers had gotten lazy. The Japanese were still hungry. The numbers were staggering. In 1950, Japan's GDP was roughly $10 billion. By 1980, it was over $1 trillion. Growth rates averaged 9% per year through the 60s. Unemployment stayed below 2%. Inflation was controlled. It looked like they'd cracked the code. And then something strange started happening. By the late 80s, Japan wasn't just rich, it was euphoric. Tokyo real estate became the most expensive on the planet. At one point, the land beneath the Imperial Palace was theoretically worth more than the entire state of California. The Nikkei stock index quadrupled in 5 years. Japanese investors bought Rockefeller Center, Pebble Beach, Columbia Pictures. There was genuine fear in Washington that Japan might buy America itself. Economists started talking about the Japanese model like it was the future of capitalism. Longer time horizons, cooperative labor relations, lifetime employment. Business books flooded the market. Everyone wanted to know the secret. But beneath the celebration, the math had gone insane. Price-to-earnings ratios on Japanese stocks hit 70. In a sane market, they're around 15. Land prices had detached from any economic reality. Companies were borrowing against inflated assets to buy more inflated assets. The whole structure was circular, and circles don't grow forever. On December 29, 1989, the Nikkei peaked at 38,915. It wouldn't reach that level again for 34 years. The crash was slow, then fast. The Bank of Japan raised interest rates to cool speculation. Asset prices started falling. Companies that had borrowed heavily suddenly couldn't refinance. Banks that had loaned against real estate were holding worthless collateral. By 1992, it was clear this wasn't a correction, it was a collapse. Japan entered what economists politely call the lost decades, plural. Growth stalled, deflation set in. The government tried everything: stimulus packages, public works projects, interest rates cut to zero, then below zero. Nothing worked. The population started aging faster than any society in history, and young people stopped spending. The same cultural traits that built the boom, caution, saving, risk aversion, now locked the economy in stagnation. Here's the uncomfortable part. Japan is still rich, third largest economy in the world, bullet trains, universal health care, almost no violent crime, but it hasn't really grown in 30 years. The Nikkei only recovered because of global inflation and currency games, not genuine expansion. Entire generations have grown up knowing only stagnation. The blueprint that made Japan rich didn't come with instructions for what happens when the model stops working. So what do we take from this? Japan's rise wasn't a miracle. It was timing, strategy, and help from a former enemy that needed an ally. But the fall suggests something darker. Maybe rapid growth always plants the seeds of its own collapse. Maybe every economic model has an expiration date. Maybe the same forces that create wealth eventually strangle it. Other countries have tried to copy the Japanese model. South Korea came close. China studied it obsessively. But no one has quite replicated the trajectory, and no one has figured out how to escape the stagnation that followed. Japan got rich after losing everything. But the question that should haunt every growing economy isn't how they did it, it's whether they can ever do it twice.